I want to check this video out then, guys, because when I was doing the Tallulah fight, you guys kind of showed me the way of potentially locking characters into a position. What was it called now, chat? Let me know what it was called. Basically, allowing you to target an enemy from both tiles, basically. So you lock an enemy into being pretty much in between tiles, which allows you to target the tile that they're on the right side or the left side or the up or down, and be able to target them both, basically. So potentially being able to hit an enemy out of the range of both units or out of the range of one unit, to giving yourself just a bit of a larger crossover, right? Hitbox, splitboxing, that's it. Splitboxing, that's the one. And I was like, damn, actually, that is kind of cool. Apparently, there's some other mechanics here. So we're going to watch this one from Dr. Silvergun. This is an older video, but I don't know probably about any of this. Key mechanics Arknights does not explain, and how to abuse them. So let's get into this one, because then as somebody who's doing the E1 challenge at the mini, any little mechanic that we can potentially use to our advantage, I think is going to help us a lot. That split boxing was a big eye-opener for me. I haven't really had a chance to use it yet, but I think it potentially could be really helpful. So let's see what other ones that we've got here from the man himself, Dr. Silvergun. All right, let's get into it. Let's drop a preemptive like, and let's see the mechanics then that the game doesn't explain, and how to abuse them.
I wanted to make a video explaining some Arknights junk, like how you can block Patriot on a tile he never even steps on. As I was writing that, I realized there are a bunch of mechanics that affect gameplay, but are rarely, if ever, talked about outside of some very dedicated tryhard circles. So I decided to expand the topic of the video to include various bugs, exploits and mechanics I have learned about over the years. Because Arknights is coded kind of like the Yostar translation, there are a ton of exploits and I'm not familiar with all of them. So, I will only cover the ones I know well enough to consistently abuse, and I think are relevant enough to go over. I will talk about how...
I like that framework, because sometimes people throw in things that they themselves can't even do with them. Like, you know, hey, try and figure it out then. This is ones that he's actually got a grip of and uses regularly. Alright, let's go.
I think the code works, but I don't data mine shit, and most of my explanations are just mental models, so I can make sense of and experiment with the bugs. I may call them tactics, exploits or bugs throughout the video, so let me be clear on this. I do not care about classification, I just want to win. I feel free to argue about the definitions in the comments if you want though. So let's get into
I like that, I don't care about classifications, I just want to win. Nice.
If you've watched a lot of my videos, you might remember my clear run H2-1, where I pushed the Musty into a tile they normally can't reach and blocked them there. I've both used and seen strategies like this in the past, so I didn't think much of it at the time. After I was done grinding all the H12 stages, a question kept nagging me in the back of my head. How exactly do enemies get pushed into tiles they don't even walk on? I know how to manipulate enemies, but I've always done it through trial and error. I was curious what the underlying mechanism is. The two things I knew before I started is that an enemy that has only moved in a straight line cannot be pushed to the side, only backwards, forwards, or if perfectly timed, there will be no displacement. It is possible to move an enemy to the side with a shifter or an operator that has more than one block, but we'll get to that later. So apart...
Lap is good for getting units to go on tiles that they wouldn't usually go on as well, right? When she hits him in the fear, yeah. Because I noticed we did that a few times with Patriot, right? Patriot was getting a little scared bitch and was ending up off... sometimes it can be bad for you, though, because it messed us up on that one run with Tallulah, didn't he? Where Tallulah ended up being on the tile we didn't want it to be, because we decided to run Lappy Ulta from underneath her, and she got hit with a fear, and it kind of messed the run for us up towards the end. Okay.
How do we get things like this? Well, we can only push enemies forwards or backwards, but the moment they turn a corner, all of that changes. Now we can push them to the side as well. So what's up with that? Enemies have two kinds of pathing throughout the map. Either they're like Patriot and have several checkpoints in the map that they need to clear before they can head to the blue box. This is why a lot of enemies move to the center of the tile before they start turning to clear the checkpoint. Alternatively, they have no checkpoints and just take the shortest path to the blue box. This is more...
Yeah, I've noticed that with some smaller mobs, actually. I forgot which of the one farming, one of the... shit, what was the stage name? I can't remember the stage anyway, but the enemies come out and some of them do that. They come across the tile here and then start to drift up onto this tile.
Most commonly seen on box stages, they don't bother going to the center of the tile and take the shortest possible path instead.
Okay.
Looking at the different enemy movement, you might assume that enemies with checkpoints don't get side pushed, while enemies that take the shortest path do get side pushed. Nope, that's not how it works. They can all be pushed to the side after turning a corner. I thought about all the times I've seen side pushing, like on 6.5, 7.18. In all the examples I could recall, the enemy was always pushed towards the corner they just turned. So this led me to my first theory. When enemies are going to checkpoints, they consider them cleared before they actually reach the center of the tile and therefore start turning early. In support of this, think of enemies who reach the tile and then AFK on it. If you drop an operator on them, they are pushed in the direction they came from, indicating that they are not perfectly centered. As when you do the same on an enemy that spawns on the tile, they do not move at all. This theory seemed sound, so I went out and tested it. It was quickly proven wrong. There are numerous enemies who show the exact opposite behavior, and when turning a corner, end up farther away from the corner and they're pushed in the opposite direction. I even found a few examples of enemies.
I'm assuming this is down to like the way the game's coded, in particular enemies pathing and how they're just how it's hard written into their pathing. I'm assuming, right?
AFKing on a tile that will get pushed forward instead of backward when you block them. My first theory was dead wrong. So let's summarize what we know so far. Side pushes only occur after a corner. Push direction is not random. Multiple enemies in the same route are pushed in the same direction. At this point I asked around for help. I got linked to a post on Billy which explained how block shifting works. In short, enemies are a circle, operators are a circle.
Red did mention this in the last stream actually. He spoke about that a bit. I think he was mentioning more the targeting now being the circle rather than the enemy.
If the center of the enemy circle is inside the operator circle, they get pushed out with the shortest possible path.
That makes sense.
If the center of the circles overlap, there is no push. It also went into detail on how blocking multiple enemies worked and showed an interesting application.
So does the size of the enemy dictate that as well then there? Does it?
Well, it was an interesting read and I'll link it in the description if you want to look at it yourself.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a look at that.
Answer my questions at all. I wanted to know about the corner bullshit. A Monster Hunter player that doesn't even play Arknights suggested an explanation. For uneducated hacks like myself, a floating point error is a rounding error. Say you have an enemy that moves 1 tile per second. The game updates its position every frame and runs at 60 frames a second. So 1 divided by 60 is 0.01666666 every frame. Since an infinitely long number cannot be used by the game, it rounds it down to something it can work with. For example, 0.01666667. This causes a small error in movement since the rounded number isn't a 60th of the original anymore. And we end up with a slight inaccuracy in the movement. If this theory is correct, we should be able to observe several phenomena. If we interfere with enemies by slowing down their movement speed, it should be possible to change whether they're pushed towards the corner or away from it. Second, if we find a map where enemies with different speeds have the same pathing, we might observe different enemies being pushed in different directions, based on their movement speed. On DMEX6, the Sarkaz trash mobs are normally pushed up, but if we use a slow supporter, they can be pushed down instead.
Interesting. So, okay, so as I was saying then, like, I know there is faster moving, larger enemies, so I imagine the size is going to be, it's the speed, but you know what I mean, like a lot of bigger enemies are slower, right? And I'm wondering as well with the size of their hitbox, if you will, because obviously, if there's a bigger hitbox, and it's 2 units is traveling at the same speed, right, and one's got a bigger hitbox, and I don't know if they have, this is how it works, then that hitbox is going to be reaching a point quicker than the other hitbox, if that makes sense, right? Now, I'm just making shit up here, because the math ain't mathing for me, because I'm a smooth brain, right? I just see things, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I would never have thought to have started breaking it down the way he did, but this is why he's probably really good at the game, and I'm not. You know?
And on CBEX2, we can see different enemies with the same path be pushed in different directions. As a bonus on ICS2, we can observe the opposite. The truck is normally pushed to the left, but if it is enraged, it gains a movement speed buff and it can be pushed to the right instead.
Okay, that makes sense then, yeah.
I tried to see if there was some other way to change the push, other than using slows, and I found one. It only worked for enemies that overshoot the center though. These armored guys are normally pushed away from the corner, but if you block them just as they touch the center of the tile, they can be pushed back while still clearing the checkpoint. This will make
So, you know, in essence, when you're doing that, does that have the potential of split boxing them just the same then, does it?
to the next checkpoint while very close to the corner.
Think oh, they're the same size, are they? Okay.
Without a slow supporter. So, to summarize, enemies move in a straight line when they
Apart
spawn
from bosses.
and can only be pushed in one dimension.
The big ones.
Once they turn a corner, they can now be pushed in 2 dimensions. Enemies can only be pushed either towards or away from the corner they turned, and which one is possible depends on their movement speed. We can change the direction of the side push if we interfere with their movement speed. For practical applications, you can block enemies on tiles they don't normally step on, interfere with enemy buffs, or push them in range of another operator. Before we move on from this section, there is a possibly related exploit I'll call the Trapmaster bug. This is how Trapmaster mines are supposed to work. When an enemy triggers the mine, they should be on the mine's tile and block you from placing another mine. Even if you push them back with gravel, they're still blocking the mine. But something odd happens when the enemy is close to centered. When they're close enough to the tile center and they get pushed out, they end up at the same distance from both tiles. Which tile they actually end up seems subject to a similar rounding error. It makes sense why it only works when enemies are well centered. If you imagine the operator circles on the square tiles, there are only a few points where pushing an enemy out of the circle also means pushing them out of the tile. I'd like to remind you all that my explanations of how the game works under the hood are mostly just stuff I made up. All I care about is the end result, not the mechanics. The trick is consistent, but only works on every second tile. Thumbs mentioned it can even work if the enemy isn't perfectly centered, so my idea of what's happening may be off. I don't understand the exploit too well because I rarely use Trapmasters, I only included it because it's funny. On to the blocking section. Okay, so we know that enemies can get side.
Damn, man, all this for a fucking tower defense game, man. Holy shit. I like it, though. Bro, we didn't even... I thought this was going to be a video. Hey, look. You can do this to this carriage if you place a unit like this. Look at that. That's cool, right? This is how you can do it continually. Bro's like, nah, I'm gonna math you now, dude. I'm gonna hit you with the math. Okay, it's cool though.
I pushed after turning a corner. That's how the Musty was pushed to the top, but the Musty has a movement speed of 0.5 tiles per second, which always gets pushed towards the corner. So how did we get the Musty pushed up then? Now this is something you're all very familiar with. When more than one enemy gets blocked, they get shifted around. This is for visual purposes, so their models don't overlap and you can clearly see how many enemies you're blocking. What you may not know is that the rules behind this are very reliable and can be abused in your favor. Regardless of the direction your operator is facing or where the enemies come from, they will always get shifted in the same order. The first enemy doesn't move, the second enemy gets shifted clockwise, and then the third enemy gets shifted counterclockwise. With more than 3 block, the fourth enemy overlaps with the first, the fifth enemy overlaps with the second, and so on. This has more than one gameplay interaction. First, in the Musty's case, it can be used to move them up, so that we can later push them into the top lane, away from the corner. Okay, so that's the weird specific thing about blocking that's relevant to my H12 clear. The way blocking works in Arknights is fairly complicated, and someone that's interested in the code can write an entire article about it. As I keep repeating, I just care about the outcome. There are a lot of small details about blocking that I can go over, and I'm not sure which of them are advanced stuff and which of them are very basic things everyone knows. I guess I could ask around some more casual players, get an idea of where the baseline is, but that sounds like something a good YouTuber would do. Instead I will just info dump at you.
Okay. Yo, this is actually really interesting, this is actually really interesting. I didn't realize, again, I shows that, well, I'm new, but I'm casual, right? The block had this much intricacy to it, and the actual unit's movement within each tile. Never really like thought about it to that degree, if I'm honest.
The enemies shifted by blocking can end up closer to the blue box than the first blocked enemy, causing your operators to change targets. Block shifting can push enemies into holes when they come from unusual angles. This can occur organically if they take a sharp turn near a hole, or can be created manually by utilizing other pushes.
Interesting.
The tiles on the maps are squares, but both operators and enemies are circles. Enemies are very small circles, so if they move through the corner of a tile, stupid shit like this can happen. Because operators are circles, if enemies get blocked around the center of the tile, they will be outside of that tile, but if they get blocked in the corner, they will be partly in that tile and can be shot. Everything with
Excuse me?
balk scans for target, they can balk every 3 frames, which is why if an enemy moves fast enough, they can get split boxed into the tile they're running towards. If you balk an enemy after they have stepped within a tile, they will not be pushed all the way out, so they are now in range of that tile. But also, they will not overlap with any enemy that gets balked afterwards, meaning the second enemy that gets balked will not be...
So he's staying in the middle there because he's not blocking, whereas if he was fully in that tile, that unit would have ended up at the top and the next at the bottom, right? But surely that next one's going to go up, yeah.
Get shifted. On maps where you can deploy ranged operators on melee tiles, you will notice they can't attack enemies they block if the enemies are outside of their range, like melee operators can. When
That kind of makes sense, though.
Enemies, melee operators will attack the one that is closest to their center, instead of the one closest to the blue box. However, they will not change targets until the one they're attacking is dead or unblocked by some status like shifting.
Didn't know that. Didn't know that.
When you deploy an operator, they are invisible to enemies for a few frames and don't get targeted by ranged attacks. If they block something, the blocked enemy can target.
That explains now why a couple of times, specifically on the first Tallulah stage, what was it, JT82, where there was times and I was like, I swear I got the operator down in time then to take the burn attack off that enemy. But I was obviously just a couple of frames out. Visually, it looked like I got it done right, but frame-wise, it had already initiated to go on to that because that character wasn't targetable, I guess, then, right? Okay.
Instantly. Summons don't have this deployment protection, so they can be targeted instantly. This is useful to know on its own, but it's also part of a targeting bug we'll get into later. That's all the box stuff I can remember off the top of my head. There's a bunch more, but they come up less often. The next one is less of an exploit and more of a useful tip. Since enemies come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, it's sometimes difficult to tell where the enemy actually is, just by looking at their model. An easy way to tell the enemy's exact position is to ignore the model and look at their shadows instead. To be clear, the shadow is on their hitbox, but it's close enough. This is especially useful when trying to tell whether a drone is in range of your operators or not. On to the targeting section.
Okay,
For ranged operators, their special targeting, like
that's actually kind of helpful, that is. Especially when you've got a lot of stuff going on. Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna try and use that now in future.
tier snipers takes precedence over everything else, followed by enemies with taunt, and then enemies closest to the blue box. When I say closest to the blue box, I mean how many tiles do they have to walk before they go into the blue box. So if you have an enemy that's right next to the blue box, but their pathing will make them circle the map 10 times first, they will have a lower target priority than an enemy that is farther away but heading straight into the blue box.
Okay.
For melee operators,
makes
enemies
sense.
blocked by them take precedence over everything else, followed by special targeting, enemies with taunt, and then the closest to the blue box. It's a bit more complicated in practice because enemies have various taunt levels, but this almost never comes up. The only notable example I can think of is H74, where Patriot has a higher taunt priority than his shield guards. These guys suck at guarding. For both operators and enemies, finding targets works the same way. Every few frames, they search their range for valid targets. Once they find the target, they start the attack animation. This is why you can have a melee operator hit a fast enemy after they have left their range. This works well enough with most normal enemies, but we have a weird quirk with enemies who attack more than one target. They first determine how many attacks they should launch, only after that do they check who they should attack. This can be exploited like so. The caster has one target in range. They prepare one attack. You then either use a summon or deploy an operator directly on top of them. Their only attack gets used up by the new target, thus protecting another operator. You can do this for every single attack, but you will need a ton of bodies and it becomes impractical. Most enemies have different attacks for melee and range, even if the damage in a...
So what do you mean is that dropping them on top? Does it mean like in regards to like a redeploy or... Let me just listen back to that.
The new target, thus protecting another they should launch. Only after that do they check who they should attack. This can be exploited like so. The caster has one target in range. They prepare one attack. You then either use a summon or deploy an operator directly on top of them.
Oh, on top of the enemy. Okay, I think that's just what he's saying, yeah? On top of the enemy, yeah.
Their only attack gets used up by the new target, thus protecting another operator. You can do this for every single attack, but you will need a ton of bodies and it becomes impractical.
I think I get what he's saying there, right? I
Different
think.
attacks for melee and range, even if the damage and animation is exactly the same. This is why the priestess in IS4 can freeze your operators when they are blocked. The melee attack has its own cooldown, and they can use it even while the ranged attack is on cooldown. Works the other way around too. If a ranged enemy is unblocked, they will instantly use their ranged attack, regardless of when they last used their melee attacks. If you block a ranged enemy with an operator, they will only use their melee attacks, but the same isn't true for summons. Since summons aren't invisible to the search cycle on deploy, it's possible for an enemy to detect them as a valid target for a ranged attack before they are blocked, causing them to take more damage than an operator would. This doesn't always happen because it depends on whether the enemy gets blocked or the summon gets detected by the ranged attack search scan first. Something related happens with enemies who have special attacks like the Wu or the Emperor's Blade boss. They seem like they always use their special attack first if it's ready, but they can use their normal attack and then use their special, based on how their search scan ends up. You can exploit this to your favor, of course, by manipulating exactly when they use their special attacks to whatever is convenient for you, but for most run it just helps to make it less frustrating if you know why it happens. Pause deploy. This is probably the most well-known exploit in the game, and it only works on an emulator. When you press escape it pauses the game, but unlike a normal pause,
Does that not work on mobile then? The pause deploy. Bro will never fail a stage again. Yeah, let's not get that way. Watch probably the first stage you played today. It's called retargeting. Basically, reset the target lock by range attacks by locking them, by blocking them right before the movement and the enemy to use the attack. Right, okay, I'm gonna have to try and figure that out then. Wonder why Hyperglyph didn't add the red tile under the shadow of flying enemies. No way, Mel. Okay, damn.
you can do it while you're deploying an operator. This lets you deploy them while the game is paused. A lot of people swear by this one, but I've never found it all that useful, since I dislike pausing anyway. You can use
I'll say, well, I don't know, maybe I'll be proved wrong. I don't know if it necessarily, it's so much an exploit in that sense. I think it just gives you a little bit of time, doesn't it? You know, it goes from slowing the game down to stopping the game. So it just gives you a breather, doesn't it, while you're doing the deploy, right? Rather than just pausing to think. You know, you're pausing while you're doing, you're allowing you to get an action done, right? So I suppose, like, if you're going frame by frame in that sense, maybe there's the advantage there, right?
Use hotkeys or just move your hands a bit faster to get a similar enough result. Kill gates are a mechanic baked into the game to make it easier on you, but we can push it even further. A lot of bosses have one wave of enemies for their first phase and a second wave of enemies for their second phase. The second wave only spawns once you kill the first phase of the boss. There is a mechanic that prevents the first and second wave from overlapping though. If you kill the boss
you can do it on mobile, it's just really hard to do, is it?
Then the second wave won't start until you kill every enemy from the first wave. This can be exploited to isolate the boss and safely dispose of any enemies.
Yeah.
This is less of a bug and more just abusing the intended game mechanics to break the level.
I wouldn't even say that's like abusing to break that. I think that's a baked in feature, right? That's just the game saying, look, this is what's happening. You deal with it, right? And you can deal with it by, you know, stalling's a good factor, and then dealing with everything else, you know what I mean? And then, you know, breaking the level down for you in a sense, right? And just making things a little bit easier. It allows you to not be overwhelmed, if you will. But yeah, I get what he's saying. I get what he's saying.
It works on every boss that has a wave gated behind their second phase, though it isn't always worth the hassle to set up. One extremely funny example of this is the chapter 13 boss. The boss constantly respawns in phase 1 until you break his altar, but the altar itself isn't considered an enemy. If you kill every enemy unit on the map, the game will consider his first phase done and spawn the second wave, while the boss is still stuck in phase 1. A useful trick for H13-4. This isn't an exploit, but something everyone should be aware of. When an operator or summon dies, they will not instantly refund their deploy limit. If you manually retreat them, you'll get it back with no delay. Small detail, but it's useful to keep in mind.
Didn't know that.
Alright, these are all the things that I make use of relatively commonly. There's a bunch of other ones I didn't touch on, either because I'm not too familiar with them, or I thought they were too niche. There's also the whole shifter thing, but that's a can of worms that somebody else can cover. Talking about Mystic Casters next.
The old shifter thing. What's he referencing there? Okay. All right. Interesting. This feels like a video I need to watch again off stream because I need to ingest this information, and this is one of those things I need to play and do it as well. Right. Really, really interesting, especially the whole like game mechanic around where an enemy is and units are considered to be by like the game itself regarding their hitbox and their like their pathing and all that sort of stuff as well, and their speed. Of course, the speed is the main factor really. Is actually really interesting and something I didn't know about. Of course, Red did mention the other day when we were talking about the tiles, he was like, it's more of a circle than the tile. Like the tile itself is the tile, but obviously the operators within them act more as a circle, and that's how the targeting and all of that sort of stuff's dictated as well. Really interesting, actually. Really, really interesting. Like the math side of stuff, man, just goes straight over my head, right? Because I'm terrible at math, right? I'm a white English dude. I'm shit at math. But yeah, I still find it really, really interesting, actually. And the thing with exploits, if you will, or using tech in a game, right? To understand fundamentally why the game does stuff in regards to the engine or the coding or enemy pathing, hitboxing, all that sort of stuff, does make it easier to replicate in game rather than just being like, well, if you do this, it works, which is the simple thing. And if it's easy enough to do, but understanding why something works allows you to potentially be able to replicate it in other situations, or even come up with new ways of using something, right? Because if you understand the way it works, you can then try and implement it in different situations and scenarios as well. So yeah, man, this was really, really interesting video again. Another thing that for me again, which solidifies why this game has got such a good good design to it, right? Of the ability that there always feels like there's a cool, interesting other solution to something. And I think it's one of the reasons why, for me, it really stands out in this space of in regards to options and a little bit of thought process into the things you're doing, right? Really cool. But guys, you all know Silver Gunman. Go check him out. This was a really interesting video. We're going to have to watch more of these kinds because I found this really, really interesting, actually. So, yeah, great video. This was a great video.